Welcome to Grapple Arts Radio. We are very serious. Serious about rolling around on the ground with men wearing pajamas.
So today I'm literally very excited to be interviewing Jon Chaimberg, who's a major player in the field of MMA conditioning. And if you don't know of him, if you haven't heard of him, I can guarantee you that you've heard of many of his athletes that he works with. So I'm looking forward to picking his brain and getting some more information about MMA conditioning and maybe some jiu-jitsu and grappling conditioning as well, which is a field that's pretty controversial. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and even a lot of the experts disagree. So today we're going to go talk to Jon and see what he has to offer. So hi, Jon.
How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Yourself?
I'm doing great, thank you.
So maybe just to introduce yourself to our listeners, could you talk about maybe a who's who in the zoo? Who have you worked with in the field of combat athletics?
I guess the major players would be, George St. Pierre, Rashad Evans, Nathan Marquardt, David Loiseau, Shane Carwin, Dennis Kang, Kenny Florian now has come to me, Keith Jardine. I'm trying to think who else. I don't want to leave anybody out. Jonathan Goulet, Canadian Olympic team, wrestling team. I'm sure I'm leaving people out, but
well, if you think of them later, you can add them in.
Okay.
We got no problem with that. Well, of those big names, like who's the last guy that you worked with? Did you work with any of them today or yesterday?
I work with George. I work with Loiseau, Florian, and Donald Cerrone. I don't know if you know Cowboy Cerrone. So
okay.
I work with them. Dennis just came off an operation, so I didn't see him today.
All right. Well, let's just to give people a rough sense of what you do and how you work. Could you talk about, say, George St. Pierre's last workout with you? What specifically did you do, unless that's top secret classified information?
I can give you the outline. Is basically work after we've finished our active warm up, we go right into our power. So with George the other day, we did hurdles. So he can jump pretty high. We get him doing easily 50-inch hurdles for repetitive sets. He does a lot of most of my fighters. I'll build a program suited for them, so there'll be a lot of rehabilitation and some core work in. So we'll get that in between the hurdles, and then we'll go to our Olympic lifting. So George did some single arm snatch the other day, and we're in a pretty big strength phase. So he's doing some weighted chins, some presses, all complex to some power movements. So we do a lot of intricate stuff with George because he's such a complex athlete. And like I said, everybody's programs are tailored for them, what they need, and when they're trying to peak. So George is around 6 weeks out now, and we have him. We have him pretty much in a power and strength phase right now.
Okay. Well, we're definitely going to pick up on the periodization and program design later on in the interview. So one thing that comes to mind is for elite level fighters, are there any sort of benchmarks that you can point to? For example, if you're fighting in the UFC, what sort of time should you be able to run 800 meters in, or 400 meters or a mile? Or what would be a decent bench press for somebody at that level?
It's weird to say. I know there should be a number put to that, and CAWA, which is the Canadian Amateur Wrestling Association, has benchmarks which they look for each weight class, and you'd have to basically match, how many chin-ups can someone do, how many bench presses with 225, or I don't know what what someone's vertical must be at a certain weight. What I do is I assess the guys to start. So most of them are pretty much lacking from the get-go. I mean, George was really, really weak the first time we started working with him. He was, he did 8 bodyweight chin-ups, which, people are shocked that he could only do 8, and he was pressing, 55-pound dumbbells.
And he'd already been fighting a long time.
He had already beaten Matt Hughes once and lost to Sarah. So he was already, technically, he had been world champion already. So imagine a world champion that physically weak, and you wouldn't really see him as that. But in the gym he was doing all the wrong things. So he would be classified as pretty weak. I mean, he's doing, he can probably do 8 chin-ups now with 80 pounds around his waist. So he does triples with 100 pounds around his waist, and he's pressing 120-pound dumbbells. He's freakishly strong right now, but from where he came from, it's even more impressive. Someone like Nate Marquardt had a bit more of a base when I met Nate, so he's seen huge results, but he's put it on top of a very athletic base that he already had. So Nate was already quite strong, and we've just really he's one of my biggest freaks in the gym, so he's even more impressive right now. So Nate would probably be the only guy out of all my guys who in the gym would have been able to almost pass, strength test the first day I met him. He was strong enough to complete certain tasks, and we just tailored him to be even more explosive. And if you watch his last fights, you'd see, he has what we call power endurance. He's able to explode late in fights, which is what I'm looking for all my guys.
Okay. So now we've got Fighter X who comes to you and he says he's, fought in the King of Cage 5 times already, and he's looking to make his first fight in the UFC or in Japan or something. What would your specific assessment of him consist of? What would you have him do? Would you have him run? And if so, how long? Would you have him bench press dumbbells? And if so, or what would be your measures?
I mean, for me, it's weird because I just have an eye for movement. So I basically have to look at certain movements. So number one, I assess their movement, how they squat, how they lunge. I give my own variation of what's called the functional movement screen. It's been around, it's a benchmark, and I put my own twist on it. And I'll basically assess strength levels. I won't have to give someone, have someone max out on chin-ups to see. I'll just basically, tell them to eccentrically load maybe 5 seconds and explode up and give me, 6 chin-ups or pull-ups, and I'll basically be able to see, gauge what their strength levels are just from that. I'll have them single leg squat to a depth, and I can tell right away, how strong they are off one leg. And, a lot of people are used to squatting off 2 legs, but the whole sport consists off of one leg. Your legs are never set, bilaterally like a squat is. So we want to train the legs, unilaterally and very functionally. So I single leg squat them, see how they move, see what their stabilizers are like. Most people have very weak stabilizers. Core is weak, so there's a number of things I'd look at, and then from there I'd build. The basis of the program has to stay. Your outline sort of always stays similar, but then you have to concentrate on certain things. If someone's a weak puller, a weak pusher, has weak legs, weak hips, whatever the case is, you'd have to sort of work on that. Prehabilitation is very important. Prehabilitation is basically, if you're rehabbing someone, means they're already hurt. If you're prehabbing someone, means you're trying to avoid them getting hurt. So George had come to me with a number of injuries in a row. So it's very important to get his hips, groin, knees, that area strong so he doesn't get injured again. And knock on wood, he hasn't been injured in the last 2.5 years since we've been working together.
Okay. Well, that takes us to the whole functional training versus sort of traditional strength training, say bench press, deadlift, squat, barbell curl, what have you. And of course, one of the things that makes seeing functional training so interesting, that's so different. You watch All Access on TV, and it's much more interesting to see a fighter doing, one-arm push-ups or full rollouts with an ab wheel than it is to see him doing just bench press again and again. So do you have any comments about the whole traditional weight training versus so-called functional training that you could share with us? Well,
what's happening now is that you have so many different schools now of thought on what's good, and what's happening is, I really don't believe in the whole, we have so much science behind us now. Why don't we just train, properly? But there's so many different people who train different ways. People are still bodybuilding, which is, probably the worst for sport. But another thing that's getting very popular now is people are trying to really make, I don't know if you've seen, I don't want to name any names, but people are trying to put a lot of shock value to the training, being, it's warrior training, and they try and make it look crazy and challenging, but there's no periodization, and it's just, a bunch of really, really interesting and tough movements. It's almost CrossFit. It's almost CrossFit, really, even worse than CrossFit. And not that, I don't want to say that there's anything wrong with CrossFit, but for sport, CrossFit is just not conducive because there's no periodization. It's just people who do CrossFit get really good at doing CrossFit. You don't get really good at doing a specific sport. So our programs are built, specifically for my athletes. They're not built to have fun or to look freaky or flashy or build big muscles. It's basically to get as efficient as possible.
Well, let's talk a little bit about periodization and program design then. Now, it's a subject I'm really interested in. Now, assuming that you're working with an athlete for an extended period of time, how do you organize their phases of training? What are the phases? How long do they last? And what are the goals of each phase? Well,
the traditional goals would be that I would look for are general preparation phase. So that would be phase number one. That's basically the athlete comes to you and you basically have to, if I'm dumbing it down, it's basically just getting the body ready to start your training phase. So it's basically getting their body used to working and moving, getting them used to some volumes. Number two traditionally would be a strength phase. We're trying to really get their strength levels, up. Number three would be a power phase. Number four would be a power endurance phase. And number five would be an endurance phase. That would be right, 2 weeks out, 2.5 weeks out. The thing with our training is we don't do any linear periodization. So it's not a matter of some schools of thought will work on one specific quality at a time, meaning that if you're working on a strength phase, you can't really touch on anything else. Your whole phase, your whole mini cycle or whatever cycle you're in is based on getting strong. So there's very little power work and there's very little endurance work and there's very little speed work, and it's all about strength. So the way I train is that even though I'll have a concentration, so let's say we're in a strength or power phase, I'll never neglect energy system work. I'll never neglect the other aspects of the training cycle to focus on one. Because what happens is once you get good at something else, you're gonna have something else lack. And then when you want to go focus on those things, the thing that you got good at is going to start coming down. So you always want to try and have a concentration, in my mind, but never neglect your power. Is your most important part of this sport is power endurance. To be able to explode and to produce power and then quickly recover and then produce power again. So that has to be in every mesocycle you have, and that's how we train our guys.
So could you give me an example of a routine that would be a good example of developing power endurance? What exercises might you be stacking on top of each other?
Well, I would be doing complexes, which I'm a huge fan of. Whereas, what I mean by a complex is, let's say I do a strength move, a classic strength move. Let's say a pull-up, a weighted pull-up, very heavy, very challenging, a lot of intensity. The second I finish that, I will go to a very, very explosive med ball slam. So I'm using the same similar muscles. One's a strength move, but then's an explosive power move. So I'm basically training my muscles to be able to explode, under fatigue, number one. Number two, I might just train them power-wise in a certain way. So either through Olympic lifting, plyos, hurdles are a great way of creating elasticity. So elasticity is the ability to create, an explosive movement over and over again. So, hurdles are a great way to but see, I'm giving examples of my elite guys. If someone came to me off the street, they might not be ready to even jump a hurdle. They might have to start off on, phase one of plyos, which would be box jumping. Do you know what I mean? So there has to be a definite progression scheme when you're training these athletes. I'm talking about on a high level here. Plyos are great. Olympic lifting's great. I put in acyclical circuits, which are basically power movements anaerobic movements. It's just basically trying to mimic the intensities of a fight. So there could be, in a fight, it's not like it's not cyclical. It's not like you're running around a track at a pace or riding a bike hard. It's basically ups and downs in a fight. You could have a clinch, you could have striking, you could have a scramble, you could have wrestling, you could have groundwork, there's so many different aspects of a fight with different intensities that you want to create a circuit that can mimic that, and in there you want to be able to produce power when tired. So that's another way we might formulate a power endurance phase.
Well, that just takes us to so many potential questions I could ask you, but first I have to ask you this. It seems to me that the power endurance is important in MMA. I mean, obviously, punching somebody in the head or taking them down is a power move, and it's important in wrestling. Again, picking someone up and slamming them is important. But for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I guess to some extent submission grappling, it seems to me that there's a lot more isometric work. So if you were working with a high-level, say, Jiu-Jitsu guy, Roger Gracie, Demian Maia, Marcelo Garcia, getting ready for, say, the Mundials, which are happening real soon, how would your phases and the importance of the phases be different for that kind of athlete?
For those kind of athletes, it's funny, but you name me a lot of high-level guys that are in
MMA as well.
So the problem with them is that because jiu-jitsu is such a slow-moving, slippery, most of the time, it's very, very, methodical, cerebral. I would need to work on these guys' power because their power levels are probably very low. Their anaerobic capacity is probably very low, so I would probably have to, keep them in that phase a bit longer. So those guys would be a bit different. But pure jiu-jitsu guys, I would definitely have them work more through isometrics. Not more through isometrics, but do a lot of isometrics with them. And not only that, what we do even with our regular guys is do some iso holds to explosion. So what we'll do is, let's say you're holding yourself in an inverted row, or you're holding yourself at the bottom of a press, whatever it is. What you would do is you would explode out of it after a certain amount of seconds. Let's say you hold something for, you hold something for 20 seconds. Then what you would do right after that is you'd explode out of it with, 10 presses, not 10 presses, let's say 6 presses after you have an iso hold for like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're working
you have an hour after you've isometrically exhausted the muscle.
Exactly. So that might be happening in jiu-jitsu where you have an isometric hold for a period of time, and then you have to explode into the next move. You only have a split second, so you want to be able to have power from that fatigue level through isometrics. So that's some of the stuff we might do.
Okay. Now we've got to move to maybe, in my opinion, maybe one of the most controversial of the subjects of conditioning, and that's running longer distances versus shorter distances, sprints versus long, slow distance training, LSD training, working aerobics versus anaerobics. And I've heard from my friends who've trained with you, Dennis Kang, and I've talked to George St. Pierre about this, and I've talked to Adam Ryan, who you met recently. He says hi, by the way, that you're very focused on sprint work as opposed to longer running, more the old school boxing, going out and doing road work approach to things. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm really against the long, slow work. It's just not conducive anymore to anything other than running, slow. If you're a marathon runner, I can understand, but this is MMA. These are, for MMA, it's a 5-minute round, and you have only 3 of them, and you're trying to be as powerful as you can through those rounds. So when you run slow and your ground contact's slow, you become, slow. Your heart rate's never getting up over, X. So what happens when in a fight you have to bring it to X plus 30 beats? You know what I mean? It's not, or tax your muscles through an intensity it's never seen before. It's just not our sport anymore. It's very old school. Boxers did a lot of road work. So from, mixed martial arts takes stuff from different arts and from boxing and from, the years it's taken, distance running and road work as part of training. You saw BJ Penn do a lot of long distance running. You see a lot of people do it, and it's just not conducive to recovery of power movements. So people still do it to this day. And I'm sort of being a bit more lenient now with my guys who want to jog. I won't let them jog, but I'll let them do, bike work, or as long as there's no ground contact and the body's getting a bit slower. I'm really I don't like slow ground contact. So I've started letting Dennis ride the bike, David Wetzel ride the bike if they need to make some weight. But I don't like them jogging. I don't like my athletes jogging. I like them sprinting. And the heart rate when you sprint or do Tabatas has to travel through so many different areas that it would never reach it through pure aerobic work. So if you're running aerobically, your heart rate gets up to 145 max, let's say, and I mean max. They're probably not taxed that much through jogging. You can never train anaerobically through aerobics, but through anaerobics you'll hit a lot of aerobic work. So there's studies done on Tabata that would say
Tabata,
that
you mean 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, 8 to 10.
Exactly. So you could reach basically through doing one set of Tabata. So basically, let's say 3.5 minutes total. 70% of the benefits of the study was basically you'd get more benefits through one Tabata than running 60 minutes at 70% of VO2 max. So one 3.5 minute session, and it's 3.5 minutes, but it's really only 140 seconds of work. You get more benefits than actually running 60 minutes at 70% of VO2 max. So it's quite astounding, that you could reach that, and the benefits would be aerobically, not anaerobically. That's aerobically. So the benefits of doing sprint work and intervals is definitely outweighs everything else, especially when these guys train so hard as it is, and time is also, these guys have X amount of practice a week. We need to focus on a lot of things. If you're willing to tell me that I could do something in 3.5 minutes, that will give me 70, more benefit than something you could do for an hour is unbelievable, number one. And number two, it's just better for them. It's just more conducive for their sport. They're not in a slow sport. They're not in I call it the Rich Franklin syndrome, is before Rich Franklin would just go to machine to machine. And I feel so bad for Rich, is that he's such a hard worker and such a dedicated athlete and such a nice guy, and doesn't know any better. And he was just training wrong for so many years that he became very, very slow twitch. So basically, Rich can go a long time at a medium pace. So against a guy like Travis Luter, he'll look great because he can basically maintain a slow pace all the way through. So all you're going to do is basically wait for someone to gas, and then they'll look slower and you'll look faster. But someone like George is explosive for 5 rounds. He's not. It's not like he starts off slow and then someone dies out. George is explosive, 5 rounds. Most of my mates are explosive 5 rounds. So we're looking for an athlete to be explosive, not to be medium pace for a long distance.
Can you give us some examples of I'm assuming you're doing Tabatas mostly on machines like treadmills, but are there other machines that you're using? And second of all, what sort of speed and slope, and how many sets and how many overall sets of Tabatas are these guys doing on average?
Well, on the treadmill, I like to have a base of an athlete comes to me and I'll test them on a base, so I can tell right away, where they're at. But someone like Kenny Florian is a very good runner. So when he came in, he was actually way ahead of the curve on that, as opposed to he was one of the weakest at a lot of different other things. But come to the running part, he was actually decent. So most guys I like to start at 7 miles an hour and 15 incline, and use that as a gauge, and then I can sort of see their fatigue level, see the recovery of their heart rate. So we'll put a heart rate monitor on and see what their heart rate gets up to, and then how fast they can how many beats they can recover in a minute. Normally the 15 incline and 7 miles an hour is a good base. And, I got Kenny up to 8 miles an hour, 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, and that's pretty good for Tabata to be able to do 8.3 miles an hour and 15 incline, and that was just recently. So when he started off, there was no way. He's progressing at a huge, huge rate now. Kenny's really coming along nicely. So I guess your question was, what kind of Tabatas we're doing, what kind of anaerobic work we're doing. That would be on the treadmill. We do a lot of airdyne Tabatas. So exactly the same thing, but on the airdyne bike and trying to keep the
RPM.
Yeah, we try to keep the RPMs over 90. I like them pushing sled probably more than anything else in the world. Sled is very important to us. We do a lot of shuttle runs, so the change of direction is very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we do? The acyclical circuits, like I said. I have battling ropes, which I like doing Tabatas on the battling ropes, where we change the exercises, but we'll still keep with the 20-10 rule of thumb. Since I train the Olympic wrestling team, they work
20 seconds of work, 10 seconds of rest.
Yeah, exactly. You can change it around a bit, but the thing with it is, here's the thing, is that, how can I explain it? It's that when you're doing any sort of interval, most sports are positive in work-to-rest ratio. So something like football, the play lasts, let's say, 6-7 seconds, and then they get at least 35, 40 seconds to recover, even though, maybe even up to 45 seconds with a play clock to recover, and then they get to put that power in again. So their work-to-rest ratio is, let's say, 1 to 5 positive. Our sport or sports are the only ones that are technically, negative in work-to-rest ratio. So basically, we're working more than we're resting. So we have to recover that much faster. So I like getting the athletes on a 1-to-1 work-to-rest, right away, as long as they're in any sort of shape. If they're in horrible shape when they get there, they're not going to be able to do it. But 1-to-1 and then work them into the negative work-to-rest ratio. So Tabata is a good way to start getting negative. It's 2-to-1. And then from there, I don't usually go under 2-to-1 because what you want to be able to maintain that power level. So if I would go anywhere under 2-to-1, it would mean it's very hard to say, okay, we're going to go 30 seconds very hard and 10 seconds easy. I've done it before, but you can't maintain the same pace. And I like the power that's put into shorter bursts. So it's a happy medium. That's why I really, really like Tabata for our sport. But I played around with it a bit. But
yeah, I can almost hear listeners going, or some listeners going, yeah, sprints are good. Lots of good fighters do sprints. But what about guys like Fedor? Fedor supposedly, last time I read, runs, I forget if it's 5 kilometers or 5 miles every morning before he does his other training. So what's your answer to that objection?
Fedor's Fedor. If you have great skill and you're a beast and you're a phenom, you can do whatever you want. You're still going to be successful. I mean, he's great at what he does, and a lot of people probably don't understand the way he trains. Some people can do long distance running, but the way they train is so explosive, and if you watch his style, he's very aggressive. And sport specific training is just as key as training in the gym. So when he's doing his long distance running, if that's all he's doing to screw up his patterns, then fine. But I've seen him in the gym do sambo and throw people, and that's what got George ahead of his game for so long. Is that yes, he was training poorly, but he was training sport specifically so long that he was getting a lot of the fast twitch values through his sport. So when he was wrestling, when he was taking double leg shots, you're training your body to fire explosively. So George was doing long distance running too, but he counteracted that by his sport specific movements. Some people don't, but it doesn't help to run long distances. Fedor, a lot of people say Floyd Mayweather, does certain things that are different than a lot of people, but Floyd Mayweather can go home and sleep for a week and not train, and he'd still be the best in the world. It's just certain athletes are so head and shoulders above the others that it doesn't even, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but they can do so much negative work and they'd still get away with it because they're that good. USC, the Trojans in football is an example I like to use because I've been around the team and I'm there a lot, is they recruit so many people and so much talent from they have the biggest state in the U.S., and they have such a talent pool that they can recruit 4 running backs, one more talented than the next. So for them, their weight program can be horrible, and their speed program can be horrible. I'm not saying it is. I actually respect some of the people there, but they can get away with. They have 4 guys that are studs, so at every position. So their team's going to be good regardless. Their guys are coming in running 4.4s already. You know, they might leave college and people say, "Wow, they have the fastest team in all of college, and their strength program must be amazing." But they came in running 4.4s. All they did was maintain it, and they're still fast. You know what I mean? So some guys are just blessed. You know, George is blessed. If George didn't have me, he'd still be successful. He'd be very successful. It's just his work ethic is very high. You know, he trains hard. He was champion before he met me. So, you know, obviously he lost his title and he wanted to change a few things. And, you know, thank God it's helped. You know, some guys are phenoms. George is one of those guys. George, Floyd Mayweather, Fedor. These are guys that are so head and shoulders athletically and skill-wise above of everybody else's that they can get away with doing some wrong things, which I hate to say because I hate people training, you know, incorrectly, but it's true.
That sort of takes us into the next thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the whole issue of balancing conditioning with other parts of your training. I mean, in some sports like boxing, you sort of really only have boxing and conditioning, but in MMA, as you well know, you have boxing, kickboxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, conditioning. And so how do you find a happy medium between giving them a hard enough workout so that they're challenged and that they improve physically, but not that they're beaten into the dust and get totally overtrained and break down?
Well, that's the toughest part of the sport. That's what strength coach has to really have his finger on the pulse, and a lot of people don't, is that usually they create a mesocycle or a macrocycle, whatever the case is, and they have to, you know, they come in with their sheet, and they come in with what they have to do every day. And today is this day or that day, or, you know, they have no feeling to where the athlete is and how hard to push. And, you know, they're just asking for a lot of trouble because overtraining, once you reach that level of overtraining, you can't come back. It's very, very tough to come back and get stable again after overtraining. So I really try and gauge where my athlete's at. The athlete already has, you know, at least 2 practices a day on average. So you really have to see where they're at physically, emotionally, mentally, if they have any injuries, and then you gauge basically how hard you're going to pull them through that workout. If someone can give me a lot, I'm going to push them a lot. Like a good jockey, you want to push the horse just to the edge, and then you want to bring them back. So it's similar, but if the horse doesn't have a lot to give, I can't push him past that mark to where he's going to give up on me, and basically his body's going to go into you know, a real catabolic stage, and it's a fine line.
So with regards to overtraining, what are the signs that you look at for your athletes? Is it knowing that the guy was able to do 8 miles an hour on the treadmill last week, and this week he's only doing 7.5? Or what are your clues to say, hey, back off there, you're overtraining?
I can actually just tell it in their bodies. I mean, the freaky thing about what my athletes will tell you about me is it's almost scary, and I'm starting to scare myself. Everybody's getting used to it. Is I can basically tell you what your heart rate is after doing something, and not even just by looking at you. And same thing with weight. You know, Bert in the UFC freaks out every time I'll tell him what my athlete is without even knowing. And you just have to have that connection with your athletes and know, you know, a lot of signs are very evident that you could read off, and some things you just have to get a feel for. And, you know, just the way they talk to you, the way they feel, the way they walk, the way they move, the way they even warm up. You know, a warm-up's pretty intricate, and it involves, you know, rolling out and foam rolling and active warm-up. You can see, you know, you can ask them a few questions. You know, you have a tough week. What'd you do today already? Oh, I had a tough sparring. You know, I boxed a lot. I did 5 rounds here. I'm like, okay. So, you know, then you can sort of, it's usually I have my meat of my workout that I need in, and my meat and potatoes, and the dessert that sort of comes along with it, and I need to get as much meat as I can into my workout. So if I can, I want to try and accomplish what my goals for that day were. And if it would be too much stress on the athlete system, then so be it, and I'll you know, work on some other things. But it's very important they come to the gym, and they train, and they get in the habit of just being dedicated. But to the same point, they can't start overtraining. It's very dangerous.
Well, obviously, avoiding overtraining is part not doing too much exercise and part having adequate rest, but diet is also a big part of it. So what are your guidelines to your athletes for diet, and what are the most common mistakes, would you think?
Everybody's different. I'm trying to stay away from being a diet guru because that's not my specialty. What I do is I'll give advice, and for my guys, I'll see what works and see what doesn't. Some people like George, doesn't really diet that hard, and other than maybe 6-7 weeks out from a fight, even less, he's still eating McDonald's, 7 weeks out probably. So a guy like that, you just want to sort of try and force to eat clean and, be aware. With George, it's more he gets his amino acids, his protein, his glutamine, and his fish oils is very important. So if he can get that done and sort of try and eat clean, then that's good. Someone who comes to me and says, listen, I need help with my diet, please, then I'll have more of a hands-on approach, and I'll try and help out, give my opinions on what they need. They all also have to make weight, so, some guys need to stay around a certain weight. So I'll give them, sample diet or tell them a few supplements that might help out. I'm not a big supplement guy, but, I'm pretty big on the branched chain amino acids just to keep them anabolic, and fish oils and proteins. And that's pretty much, what I'll stop at. And then if they want to supplement more than that, they can, do the research and ask around and see what works for them.
I mean, branched chain amino acids, fish oil, and protein, that's all pretty cheap as well, as opposed to some proprietary, untested product of recent chemical formulation with an unproven safety record.
Well, exactly.
Okay. At an elite level, what kind of trade-offs are you looking at between different physical attributes, say between strength and flexibility, explosiveness and endurance, aerobic and anaerobic fitness? I mean, obviously, Joe Blow off the street, you put him through any kind of exercise routine and he's going to improve in everything. But at these elite level guys who are just a half step away from overtraining, can you give us some concrete examples of some of these trade-offs between those sorts of things?
Well, can you repeat the question? What am I looking for in?
Well, at an elite level of
yeah.
What constraints are you as a conditioning coach dealing with in terms of trade-offs? Like if you work their strength harder, does their flexibility go down? If they increase their explosiveness, does their endurance go down? If their aerobic capacity goes up, does their anaerobic capacity go down? What sort of trade-offs are you dealing with?
It all depends on the athlete. It really, everyone needs different things. Everyone's built a certain way. Everyone's muscle fibers are different. I have some fast twitch guys. I have some slow twitch guys. So the trade-off is, what is my athlete, lacking? What do they need to work on? And can I maintain what they're good at and at the same time build what they're bad at or not adequate enough at? And that's my job. Is if they're not explosive, I have to make them more explosive while keeping, their endurance. But if they're already great at something, they're going to stay good at something, But I need to make sure they can work on other things. BJ Penn is training with a guy named Marv Marinovich, which is he's an interesting guy out of California, but his strengths are he works on people's flexibility and balance, and he's balanced guy and does a lot of things on unstable surfaces. But
BJ's
that's probably the worst.
With those things.
That's probably the worst person for BJ to train with because he's already good at those things. You're asking BJ to be better in balancing and more flexible. So if he gets, 5% better in both those aspects, wow, he was already great at them. But what's going to happen when, he's got to work on his strength or his anaerobic capacity or his power? They're still going to be lacking. So that's my job, is to work on their weaknesses and keep their strengths at a very, very high level.
When I was getting ready for this interview, John, I let my readers know that I was doing it, and a lot of people came back to me with questions, a lot of which we've tried to work into this interview. But the number one question, it was asked about 20 times in different ways, was something like, I'm a busy guy, I'm not an elite level fighter, I train 2 or 3 times in a week, jiu-jitsu or MMA. What can I do in 1 or maybe 2 sessions a week? And can you give me some examples of what I could do that would increase my jiu-jitsu or my MMA skills, keeping in mind that I've got to get out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning and drag my ass to work, and then maybe in the evenings, if I'm not too dead tired, go and train in an MMA class. What advice do you have for the non-elite level guys? But, the motivated guys, but we just don't have the time to be at that level.
Put together some a training principle where you got your program's pretty much set, and you can have a linear day and a lateral day, and start off slow with some basic plyos.
Could you elaborate on linear day versus lateral day?
Well, that's pretty advanced, is that if I see someone 3 times a week or twice a week, then I'll have one day where a day is linear, where, let's say we're doing hurdles, then it's a linear day, means we're going straight ahead. It's just regular hurdles. If it's a lateral day, we're doing lateral bounds or medium lateral hops. It's just a way of strengthening the body through different planes. If a regular day is a regular lunge, then a lateral day would be lateral lunges and different movements of sorts to help the body get strong in different ranges of motion in different planes. So even just a basic form, you're doing pulling, pushing, hip dominant, knee dominant, and rotational or anti-rotational exercises. You're off to a good start. And if you're gonna want to do some anaerobic work, then intervals on a 1-to-1 basis. If you can get to -2 to 1 and do some Tabata, is great as well. So those are some of the things that you want to work. Pull is horizontal or vertical, so either a chin up or an inverted row. Pushing, horizontal or vertical, so either a dumbbell press or an overhead press. Hip dominant, knee dominant, so either a single leg deadlift, single leg squat, or one's hip, one's knee dominant, and you can play around like that.
Well, and do you think that you need to do a long, slow distance conditioning phase to build up for interval training, or just go with easier intervals?
No, just go with easier intervals. So if you're doing 6 and 15 on the treadmill, which is very tough for a beginner, 6 miles an hour and 15 incline, then instead of doing Tabata, which is -2 to 1, you might have to do 20 seconds on, 40 seconds off, and go 2 to 1 positive.
Okay.
And build your way down to 1 to 1, and then -2 to 1. So it's just a way of progressing yourself depending on what shape you're in already.
So we've obviously just been talking about conditioning, but obviously a lot of MMA is also technique. I remember watching some old tapes by Boss Rutan where he'd be working conditioning on the treadmill, I think it was, or kicking pads. I think it was treadmill, and then he'd get off the treadmill and roll around on the ground with somebody. So mixing in fight-specific movements, either grappling or punching the pads, together with conditioning. Do you ever do that, or is that you just focus on the sport-specific movements but not the actual combative training?
Sport-specific movements are great. I mean, in some of my acyclical circuits, what I'll do is I'll have filmers hold pads for George, as one of the circuits, because I need that realism, that intensity that only can be mimicked through, the actual movement. So, we'll put some wrestling moves in there. We'll pummel a bit. George will do a few standing doubles. It's quite interesting the way we put our circuits together, but we want to make it the intensity is as real to a fight as possible. So I can see what Bas is trying to do, whether he's doing it the right way. I don't know his program design, so I can't tell you, but the fact that he's trying to put, running into, sport-specific movements, it's not, there are good parts of that. Some guys have decent parts in their training mixed into a lot of, shit. So the way their training is, they're getting some benefits surrounded by, garbage, but they're still doing some things decently.
So, I'm just amazed at the amount of stuff that we've covered. So an obvious question is, where did you learn all this? Is there obviously there's no University of MMA conditioning program. There's no program for this in regular, in the mainstream. So where did you get all this information?
Just research, just studying conferences. I've been doing it a long time, and I've been around the world. So it's just taking bits and pieces from different, you know, what happens now in the world of strength conditioning is everybody has their gurus or their ways of looking at things where they have no bend. You know, their egos are whatever system they have is the system. They can't, you know, if it's my way, it's my way, and your way is wrong. So they don't take from anybody else because their way is the right way. They can't accept any other methods. I learned from Mike Boyle, who's a very big influence. And what's great about Mike is that his ego is so small that if you show him a way that's more efficient than his way, he'll switch over and he'll credit you, and he won't care about the fact that his way wasn't as good. He just wants to get his athletes better. So I try and share that philosophy. Is I want to take bits and pieces from coaches that I respect and that whose systems work and that might work for my guys. I like putting my own modality into the whole, you know, principle too, and getting my own twist on things, and you know, all that creates one training philosophy, which is what I have now.
So we're going to wrap up here, but before we go, I want to give people an idea of how to get a hold of you, either if they're interested in doing conditioning with you, or if they're interested, I believe you've got a video or a DVD coming out in the near future. So how do people track you down and track that product down?
You can go to my website, which is adrenalineperformancecenter.com, and I think you can buy it through there. We actually did a DVD, which will probably be sold on Perform Better for sure. My website, probably it'll be in GNCs and in other stores. You could look for it, but you know, best bet is going to the website. It's a progression video, so there's anywhere from, you know, some of my female clients who are 50 years old and in great shape to George St. Pierre, you know, Rashad Evans, Nate Marquardt's in it. So there's a lot of, you know, great elite athletes, but there's also the progressions that build you up to being an elite athlete, which is, it's sort of interesting. I don't think it's been done before. And you can always email me at adrenalineperformancecenter@hotmail.com, and I try to answer as many emails as I can.
Okay. Well, John, thank you for taking the time to answer this many questions and to really give us a great insight into what's going on there in Montreal, one of the premier fight training cities of the world right now.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and you know, I really encourage your listeners and your the people on the website to stay fans. It's a great sport, and you know, it's great that they really support it, and I really, you know, respect the fact that they've gotten the sport to this level.
Audio by Anton. AntonCasting.com.